All right, welcome aboard, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. As I contemplate President Donald J. Trump's executive order abolishing the Department of Education, I think of my dear friend, the late, great Dr. Samuel L. Blumenfeld, who I was with for many, many hours of broadcasting, and who wrote a shelf of books, at least, on the corruption of public education. With various titles. Is public education necessary? The whole language OBE fraud, the NEA, Trojan Horse in American Education, and many other titles. And I just think that Sam is looking
His
down
last
from
one, by the way,
heaven.
was his
The
last book was Crime for the Educators. Yeah,
with
2015.
Alex Newman, who's also been a guest here.
That's right.
Great book, all of them tremendous pieces of research. And Sam basically was calling for what's happening, the abolition of the Department of Education, a $236 billion annual budget that was put in place in 1979 as a gift to Jimmy Carter because the educrats helped him get elected, and was supposed to improve American education. Does anybody wonder whether or not American education is better today than it was in 1979 after the expenditure of $236 billion a year from that date, which is trillions of dollars? I think not. I think even most liberals would admit that they've done nothing. They've done, in fact, the effects have been negative. So we're joined by Hal Shurtleff, who is the head of the Sam Blumenfeld Foundation. He is the director of Camp Constitution. He's the former Northeast coordinator for the John Birch Society, of which we both have been honored. We both have honored for over the years as a great institution. Hal, thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me, Charles. It's always a pleasure to be on your show.
So,
But
Hal,
when Trump signed that executive order, first I thought of Sam, and then I thought of you, and I said I better give you a call because I'm sure you have the same thoughts that our late dear friend would be. I don't know theologically if people in heaven can look down and see what's going on Earth.
Right.
I looked it up, and there might be a little bit to back that up, but most say no. And I would think, why would they want to see what's going on Earth? It's a crazy mess. You think if heaven is such a, there's no tears in heaven, so they'd be crying if they see what's going on. But maybe they see the good things, and Sam would be ecstatic. And I like to think that all of the work that Sam did and all the people he influenced helped make this resolution or this executive order possible.
Oh, I believe it. It certainly did. I mean, his influence was far above and beyond anything that we can imagine. I mean, his books are widely read, generally not quoted because people like to take credit for stuff. But either way, his work has played an essential role not only in the abolishing this rotten department, but also in the launching of the homeschooling movement, not just in this country, but around the world. And I mean, and Sam basically taught us how to do homeschooling, or retaught us, because it's an old American tradition, of course. And I think that the homeschooling seemed to have taken on new legs as a result of the pandemic. In that, right?
That's right. So I think the homeschool movement is flourishing, and we're homeschooled. Well, our youngest is now 20, so we're past homeschooling, but we're still very involved in the homeschool movement because we need to be. A Camp Constitution, of course, gets a good percentage of its attendees from homeschool shows that we attend there, and we meet families, and we also work with groups like New Hampshire Educational Options, where they put on presentations around the state. Camp Constitution hosts the Sam Blumenfeld archives.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to our website, campconstitution.net, you'll see a drop down, and all we ask is a username and an email address, and you have unlimited access to most of Sam's writings, his speeches, his recordings, his videos. We don't have as many videos on the site, but if you go to our YouTube channel and put in Sam Blumenfeld, there'll be dozens. And of course, I know you've interviewed him. You work together very closely.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I shared this with you as I was going through his papers. He willed his papers to us, so to me specifically.
Mhm.
And I was going through some notes, and he considered you his best friend, at one point.
Well, at one point, we were very close friends, and we did a lot of broadcasting together. Sam really was a mentor to me. He was, in many ways, quite hilarious in his views, in terms of how he looked at politics. We discussed politics, culture, economy, health, education, just a cross-section of issues. And truly a Renaissance man, very well-developed intellect. It's a rare type of person. You don't find that often in life anymore. Although I think at the time of the founding of the American Republic, there were a lot of people like that.
Well, I think they had to be, and they didn't have as many distractions. So
Right.
most people spoke. A lot of them were fluent in more than one language and played a musical instrument, and they could build and they could fix things and build things as you really had to. You
Yeah.
couldn't call a repairman back then because you might have called your neighbors to help you, but there were no specialists in these things, so you had to do that.
Right.
And
And I also want to make a note of homeschooling. This is often a misconception that, a parent will feel like, gee, I can't do it because I don't know how to teach math. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do that. Well, the fact is that the homeschooling student is not isolated at home. You get together with other parents who are homeschooling, and you can pool your resources, hire tutors, go out and see events, have days of like field trips.
exactly.
It's not like they try to create this image of the homeschooling kid as isolated and locked at home. It's absolutely false.
Actually, Chuck, they say that the homeschooled child doesn't socialize. Now, as
Ridiculous.
homeschool parents, we were very active in our church, and we had youth groups at our church. Our girls danced. We have 4 girls, 1 boy. Our girls danced. They took dance lessons, and they became teachers. They volunteer teachers or student teachers. One of the things I noticed that when you meet a young person and shake their hand, the homeschooler generally looks at you, makes eye contact.
Yes.
In fact, some years ago, I'm in Troy, New York, at a little restaurant meeting somebody there, and there's this young black boy. He's probably about 10 or 11, and he was wearing a uniform, like a school uniform.
Yeah.
And he held the door open for me, and I looked at him and I said, the name of the school was the Troy. It's a Christian. I can't remember the name of it. It was a boarding school, and I said, "Oh, you must go to such and such a school." And I wish I could think of the name. He looked at me, and his mother was just like 10 feet away. How did you know? I said, "It's because he was respectful. He had a cheerful countenance." So it was the Redemption School, the Troy Redemption School, and I knew some of the folks involved, and we've had some of their people at our camp. And so the same thing with homeschoolers. They have a different, not all parents are perfect,
Right.
But when you mentioned earlier, there's something as homeschool co-ops. That means you have local groups. Some of them are informal. Some of them are very structured. They meet at the local library. They might meet at a church. The church may or may not, or a synagogue or other places of worship. They may or may not run them, but at least they allow to use the facility. And you're right. So let's say, hey, I'm weak in math, but we got a retired math teacher down the road, and he or she loves to volunteer their time to teach math. Or you have, we have this program called Math UC. So your homeschool, there's so much curriculum. When you go to a homeschool convention, it's a question. It can be overwhelming because where do you begin? So you can get a whole package. Now, for 2 years, my youngest used Liberty University's homeschool program.
Oh, yeah.
So, and she actually took college courses while she was homeschooled. I guess 2 of my daughters did.
Right.
And I know in homeschool is to graduate from junior college the same day they graduate from high school. It was a little challenging for my youngest daughter. It was a little too much. So I said, okay, don't worry about it. Well, and she's now a 3rd-year nursing student. She's excelling. And you're right, you can hire a tutor. So if there's certain areas that they need a little help, then you hire a tutor, and that's what we did with one of our girls.
Yeah.
And today you have fully accredited online courses that are
Mhm.
interactive. The Freedom Project Academy by our friend Duke Pesta, for example,
Mhm.
is one example. And
Yeah.
another thing too is the whole country is a classroom. I mean, I grew up I lived in, I'm in New Hampshire now in the Lakes region,
Yeah.
but there's so much rich history. And as a homeschool dad, when I used to fly around the country, and for a couple of years, my wife worked for the airline, so we could fly. I would take maybe a son or a daughter or two when
Mhm.
we would visit museums, historical places, state
Oh, yeah.
capitals.
All there.
So you can read a book and learn all about Noah Webster. That's great. But hey, let's go to his house. He's in West Hartford. Let's go take a field trip to his house, and
Right.
write a report about Noah Webster. And then the state capitol and other things that you can do.
And also, Sam Blumenfeld was an expert on phonics. He published Alpha Phonics, which was
That's
helpful
right.
to my daughter, and she's a huge, voracious reader now, and a graduate student. I think as a result of developing the basic skills of actually reading English, which is through phonetic sounding out of vowels and consonants. Sam called it systematic phonics,
Mm-hmm.
and he pointed out that the establishment has tried to corrupt and even abolish phonics and replace it with Luxay, which has created dyslexia, it's created social disorder, and it's dumbed down overall American students. He does a great job of showing this. He follows the history of it going back to John Dewey, the
Actually,
so-called
Horace Mann, even before that, Horace Mann back in
Horace
the
Mann, right in mid 19th century.
yeah, yeah.
And these guys called themselves the frontier thinkers, the progressive educators, because they were socialists and they wanted to transform the individual, independent-minded, cognitive-thinking citizen into sort of a what John Dewey called a fusion, into a new man, like a collectivized society.
Like a
And
robot.
and they worked glove in hand with major capitalists like Carnegie and Rockefeller, who wanted to have what they called human resources, who would punch a time clock every day and go to the factory and not think too much about it. In fact, the whole structure of the public school is based on the factory. They have the desks all lined up, and you sit there, and a bell goes off. That means it's lunch. Another bell. It's all like conditioning, and it's all sort of this creation of a dumbed down, non-creative workforce. So
And
Sam,
they would have ways to identify prodigies. And in fact, Bill Clinton had something when he was governor of Arkansas. He had this school program for the best and brightest, and they would recruit them. The rest of them, you're not going to get very far. And Sam was one of the first, if not the first, to acknowledge the deliberately dumbing down of America. And that's because I have these archive, I have all these great letters and articles he's done.
incredible.
It was a friend of his. It was an attorney, Watson Washburn. And by the way, you should do a little research on him. I wanted to say, who is this guy? He called him Waddy. He's a Hall of Fame tennis player.
Why not?
Sam never told me that.
Yeah.
He was an attorney, and he asked Sam, we're talking about early 60s. At this point in Sam's life, he was the editor of Grosset and Dunlop, which published the Hardy Boy, Nancy Drew books.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, Sam, can you become a member of my Literacy Reform Foundation? He says, why? He said, what's the big deal? You read it, all you have to do is learn the vowel sounds, the consonant sounds, phonetic, and you're a reader. He said, you've got to read a book by Rudolf Fleisch called Why Johnny Can't Read.
Yes.
And I think it was published in 1955.
Right.
So that book changed Sam's life. Although I have to say, Rudolph didn't go nearly as far in the research. He actually became friends of Rudolf Fleisch. He was a socialist from Austria. Came over here, before the Nazis took over,
Right.
and they would correspond. And he wouldn't collaborate officially with Sam, but he greatly appreciated his works. And all those letters are on this on the
Oh,
archive.
incredible.
Yeah,
So
just
we
look,
can see all that on the Camp Constitution website then.
in the Sam Blumenfeld archive. Yeah.
Oh, I want to look that one up.
It's great stuff. And Sam would write letters to mayors of cities, including Cory Booker. We hear a lot about him.
Sure.
He was mayor of Newark. And he said, give me the worst school in the city. And within a year, I will turn it around. Now, he had a game plan. He had teachers that were willing to relocate if necessary. He had a budget. You know, you got to pay them. I mean, I can't bring a bunch of teachers in without, but he had a real game plan. And if he got any response, it was basically, thank you, but no thank you. Appreciate your concern. So they really had no interest.
No.
And you think, okay, what could happen? Let's invite Sam to Newark. Let's invite Sam to Chicago. What's the worst thing? You pay hear this guy out, right? They had no interest in it. And that proved, you see, if they wanted to solve the problem, they would have. In fact, back in the 1840s, in the Boston schools, they introduced the look-say method that was invented by Thomas Gallaudet, who I think was a good man. I don't think it was a subversive.
Well, the original idea of it was supposed to be to help deaf students. I think it wasn't really meant to, you know, they took this and they transferred it into like a general, it's like, aha, why don't we do this for everybody? And so they're looking at words as if they're hieroglyphics, and it would scramble a young person's mind. You wouldn't be able to develop the proper method of sounding out words. And it was very deliberate. And Sam also talked about Marva Collins in Chicago, speaking.
Oh, yes. They made a movie about her.
They did. And she was interviewed. I don't know if she kind of stayed with it, but she, you know, a Black woman in the toughest neighborhood in Chicago. On West Side Preparatory. She took an abandoned grocery store and turned it into a school and really put in certain measures that really changed people's lives. Discipline, people had to show up, you know, properly dressed. People had to, like, you know, sit, you know, kind of like focus. And she used systematic phonics to teach young people how to read properly, because obviously if someone can read properly, they can learn and have access to anything in the world. They can develop their mind. They could go whatever direction they choose to. They have self-determination. Sam used to say, you could become like the CEO of a corporation, or you could become a beach bum. It's up to you. You have agency. Because you have access to information that you can assimilate on your own, and you can develop your own body of knowledge, your own imagination. And that this is what they were trying to circumvent in their agenda, and to basically turn America into a socialized province of the world. And this is what has taken over and dominated our American system, really since, I think, the 1930s. I don't know, it really kind of took full control in the 60s. But the final nail in the coffin was this Department of Education, which cost the taxpayers $260 billion a year. Can you imagine? I mean, you know, it makes me wonder who's actually putting that money in their pocket, right? I mean, how much of that money goes to anything even real? I mean, anything remotely.
Well, I would say offhand, 85% must go to payroll. Another 10% probably goes to maintaining their properties, like the big old monstrosity of a building that's in Washington, D.C. And as far as what actually
billion, what actually how much money that is, I think it's probably a similar slush fund to the USAID, where all this money funnels through and is laundered through this big edifice, and it ends up going to consultants and NGOs and to stuff that nobody wants to go to and shouldn't, but it all kind of gets passed around and makes its way around the world, probably. Funding this entire international, illuminated, rotten establishment. The same people that basically maintain the policy of perpetual war for perpetual peace.
That's right.
You know.
So, by the way, getting back to John Dewey.
Yeah.
John Dewey. He was a He was a humanist. He was a signer of the Humanist Manifesto.
Yes.
He had disciples in Russia when Stalin was in control. He visited Russia and tried to introduce this miserable system to the communists. And Stalin said in so many words, this is okay to corrupt capitalist countries, but not here. Stalin didn't adopt it, and he actually
Because they wanted people who could do science and people who could think and advance their socialist revolution. They saw it as a tool to weaken and corrupt the West.
Well, if you're a communist country, you have complete control over what's being taught. So you want your subject to be able to read the propaganda. On the other hand, if you live in a relatively free country where you say, well, we don't want them reading this information. We don't want them reading the great classics and the history, or even knowing how to build a bridge or how to engineer things. We don't want this to happen. We want dumbed down people. By the way, I want to mention something. Back, I don't know, it was probably 2014 or 15. I was at a library. I think it was in central Massachusetts somewhere. And they have library book sales. You go in there, you can pay $1 or 50 cents. I found this book. I think I paid a whole $1 for it. It was published by the United States government in 1941. It's called Formation of the Union Under the Constitution. And there's some great stuff in there. It was Franklin Roosevelt wrote a foreword. A man named Saul Bloom, and you probably know that name.
Wasn't he like what was it, the education something? He was
a congressman, I think, from New York. He says great guy, great advocate of the Constitution. He was a great UN advocate too. But in spite of that, so in this book, along with some great history and some great reading, is a questions and answers. And one of the questions they ask is, what role does the federal government have in education? Now, just think, 1941, Franklin Roosevelt's president. I think you had a very solid New Deal Democrat Congress, so we got far leftist. Right. And the answer was none. It said none. Yeah, it is a matter reserved for the states. So what's changed since 1941? There's been no amendment added, because the only way to change the Constitution is to add an amendment. You can pass laws, but you have to. So if the Constitution, in the eyes of the New Dealers in 1941, said we have no role, then why was the Department of Education became a cabinet level? Prior to 79, when Jimmy Carter made it cabinet level, their goal was basically to gather facts and statistics from around the country. Right. It was founded, Andrew Johnson created it. I think there was the senator from Vermont who started the homesteading. What's his name? I've been to his house too. But there was he sponsored a bill that gave people so much land. So states were allowed to set up agricultural schools, right? Right,
exactly. A lot of our big colleges started out that way. Dartmouth was that. I mean,
yes, and so that was basically to keep track of what was going on. They had no say in the matter. They just were. I almost had the name of the senator off the tip of my tongue, but I can't think of it.
This is from the mid-19th century.
No, 18 after the Civil War. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, after the either during or after the Civil War. And Andrew Johnson, of course, after the Civil War, he became president in 1865. But little by little, then you had in the 50s, they were worried about the Russians and the Sputnik, and so the federal government started putting money into education, and then under Lyndon Johnson, it just exploded.
I mean, it started out, innocently enough. I think Eisenhower, after the Sputnik, wanted to rise up America's standards in math and science, and there were grants issued to do that. And I think that certain targeted things you can make the case for it, but the problem is that, like everything else, it became a power grab. It became corrupted by the wrong people. And Lyndon Johnson added it to the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, and then you had the Department of Education, which is really the subject of Sam's book, The NEA, Trojan Horse in American Education, and how that union or that collection, which is far left, they go way back. They're very powerful. They go
back to the 1850s and 60s, I think. And they're really a union. They're just a labor union.
Yeah, but they can get people elected. They have a huge money. They're national. They've got connections like an octopus. They're in just about every state, every municipality. They started this whole process of monies going to the federal government and then the federal government giving it back to the school boards with all kinds of strings attached.
Mhm.
And so they got hooked on the money, and the strings attached had everything to do with the socialist agenda. And under the Department of Education, that went on speed. It was just crazy.
We need
Now
to
they
point out
pushed,
too that both parties are part of this hustle.
yeah.
Was it George W. Bush was the education president?
Well, right. What is it? No Child Left Behind, that kind of thing.
Yeah, No Child Left Behind. Then you had Goals 2000. That was under
Common Cause.
outcome.
All of it.
I call it
failed.
outhouse-based education, and all the stuff. See, the Department of Education does not have the legal ability to set the curriculum, but with was Common Core. They said, "Hey, Bill Gates put all the money out. You take the curriculum." The Governors Association owned some of the rights to that curriculum, so you take the curriculum, and we'll give you money.
That's
So-
right. So they basically use the carrot and the stick. If you take the money, which is big money, there's all these strings attached. And that their agenda at its core was to push a leftist internationalist agenda. That's why we have things like children getting sex change operations,
Yep.
all this stuff that came out of nowhere, and people are like scratching their heads. How did this happen? Well, this Department of Education, which is getting $260 billion a year, I keep saying that, but I want to reiterate that. They're spreading the money around like a mobster, operating in a community, grease a few palms to get something to happen. It's really corrupt and it's really rotten. And here we are with President Donald J. Trump signing an executive order to abolish it. And it looks like, seeing what we've seen from Trump so far, he means business and it's going to happen.
Well, from what I understand is that half the workforce at the Department of Education has been laid off. It still exists, and I believe because it was created with an act of Congress, it will have to be abolished, even though it's unconstitutional, and it should be just abolished outright. So I don't know if it's officially a lot of the things that they were doing are now being absorbed by other. For example, they did a lot with, I say, Down syndrome. So and of course you hear the left. Oh, my poor Down syndrome child's not going to get any help now. Well, that's not the case.
No, those things are going to continue be absorbed by other agencies.
I have friends who have Down syndrome, so I called them and say, hey, and that's what they said. Some of them don't need any government help anyway. Their child is doing fine. They don't need federal money, for them to thrive or survive. In fact, we know that on one hand, Planned Parenthood wants to kill all Down syndrome babies before they're born, and then when they're born, they somehow become wards of the federal government.
We don't even see that too often anymore, do we? Anyways, the fact is that since it was created by Congress, sure, you could reduce it down by like 95%. Put them into some little house somewhere and have a small staff and let them keep records. I'm just saying, it's like there's a way around that. That's what they're doing with USAID. I think that was the most rotten of all of these agencies. I remember interviewing, I wish I could remember the author's name. He wrote a book for Regnery, which was about the history of population control. This is when I first became aware of USAID, because they were spearheading an international effort to sterilize women without them knowing it in India and in Peru and in Puerto Rico. Can you imagine anything more evil than that? Just really loathsome programs to like.
Well, I wrote a book exposing the racist roots of Planned Parenthood. I had the correspondence between Margaret Sanger and Dr. Clarence Gamble, and I actually went to the Harvard Medical School library. I was looking for their Bush's Prescott Bush and Gamble's connections, because they were friends. They were neighbors.
Right.
But I even found the Negro Project letter. I found that Sanger spent a lot of time in India working with various Indian officials. Right. And the World War II was just over, and she's in Japan. She's trying to get an audience with the emperor. She may have met him in a public gathering, but never private setting. Japan lost a good chunk of its men and some women too. But it wasn't enough. We need to get rid of more.
Get rid of genetic races, called it.
Exactly. You mentioned Puerto Rico. they had something called the Puerto Rican Project. No, there was the Negro Project, the Puerto Rican Project. Puerto Rican women we use as guinea pigs for the birth control pill. Some
Right.
died, some got blood clots, and then after so many in the early 60s, it was approved by the FDA. But it was based on the experiments that were used on the poorest women in one of the poorest communities in Puerto Rico. And back then, the Puerto Rico, of course, it was still a province, but they didn't have any laws guiding this, so it was an easy place for these people to go. And one of the guys was from Brookline that was involved. I think that he was one of the doctors that was one of the pioneers of the pill from Brookline. And there was Sanger also had a Klansman neo-Nazi type. He actually met Hitler. He was another guy from Brookline.
From Brookline.
You got some real.
Oh,
So I'm trying to think of his name. He wrote a book about the white race being doomed. He debated W.E.B. Du Bois in the 20s, and they say Du Bois got the best of it. But both of them worked with Margaret Sanger, the Nazis and the communists.
She was very pro-Nazi, and she had Ernst Rudin, a Nazi psychologist, on her newsletter, and just loved the idea of reducing unwanted people to create this utopian world through extermination. Bringing things back to Department of Education.
By the way, Sam wrote an essay. He had a monthly newsletter.
Yes,
the Blumenfeld Education Letter.
Yes.
And I think it was June of '86. We have all of them archived on the site.
Excellent.
It was called The Creation of a Black Underclass, Eugenics in the Creation of a Black Underclass.
Yep.
And it's a timeless some of the newsletters may have talked about, the election and current politics, but this one is timeless. And I think it was June of '86, but you can scroll and see it. Download it. We put it back in print. We put it, a friend of mine, Felicia Nace, wrote a book. She collaborated the book about the Atlanta murders. You remember back in the '80s.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And she wanted to republish that. I said, well, we need to do the same thing because people need to know this. So that's one of the. And so Sam was very well versed on this topic as well.
Oh, sure. He was across the board. He had stuff happening. So yeah, that's a great resource. Again, Camp Constitution, Sam Blumenfeld archive. You can scroll down and just check it. All kinds of things. I mean, if you're working on an article, you're working on a paper for your college, it's a great resource. He's got solid information, all backed. Great stuff.
Sam was a friend of Moses Dr. Shombe from Africa.
Oh, from the Congo.
Yatanga, the Belgian. Yeah. And he actually interviewed him when he was in exile in Spain, and he interviewed him in French because he translated. Yeah. And he was one of the founders of the the Jewish Society of Americanists. And I think this was founded in the wake of all of the anti-Semitism. Jews are liberals, they're leftists, they're pro-communist. Right. And of course, there may have some, and you know more than I would ever know.
There was more than some, unfortunately.
But at the same time, there was still a lot of Jewish patriots.
Yeah, there's a lot of solid,
and a lot of Americans didn't know that. So I think it only lasted for about 4 or 5 years. But all of their newsletters and their publications and their articles of incorporation are on that site.
On which site? Your site?
On the St. Blumenfeld archive. You can spend
excellent. I can't wait to see.
Spend actually hours. I mean, a lifetime, just listening to his recordings. We have his recordings from, I think, from the early to mid '70s up until 14 or 15. I think there's some of your interviews with him. Yeah. So when he passed away, before he passed away, he said, "Hal, I want you to take." He gave me the keys to his storage units. I had 2. And then his apartment where he had a lot of stuff in plastic bags, and we had to sift through it, and he was a very orderly guy, but when he downsized, he didn't have the room. So we just went through
it probably takes years to go through his archive.
Well, we have a lot of it in cabinets, filing cabinets.
Right.
But a lot of it we had digitized, and we thought the more important things digitized. And I think there might be there was a letter that he sent to Mike, the head of the Homeschool Defense Fund, about your candidacy. He was hoping that you would somehow, yeah. So,
I loved him talk about his letter to Ayn Rand when she's like,
well,
how could you believe in God? And
I
his
know.
response is,
Yeah,
how could you not believe in God?
I know. He actually sold that letter, so we don't have that letter. He sold it, and and I thought he should have at least kept a copy. I think we had the response, but he met Ayn Rand, and he told me at those days, at that point in his life, he said he was a sad atheist. I think father had passed away, and he said that he wanted to believe in God, but he just couldn't bring himself to do that. But back in the early 70s, the mid 70s, he was working on a book about the history of American education. And I think it was called How to Tutor. I think that may have been the book.
Yes, I've seen
one of his early books was about motherhood, which is a great book. They're hard to find.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And most of those books are in PDF format on the site too. So what it took him to the New England Calvinists, and he said, "Well, these guys were the ones that got involved, and that led him to be a man of faith." I know on his deathbed he said,
Institute, right?
"What's that?"
The Chalcedon Institute.
Well, that was before he even knew them. He was doing his own research about the history of education, and it took him to New England and the Massachusetts, Connecticut, where it was so essential.
Yes.
And the Bible was the basic textbook for the students. And really, I think one of the first things they printed was this little primer. It started with Adam's Adam's sin, man fell. It was a rhyme. I forgot how it goes. But the first book that was published in Massachusetts as a colony was the Algonquin Bible.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, that was for the praying Indians.
Yes, exactly. There's 2 copies left. One of them is in the South Natick Library under protection.
Yeah.
And the other one, I think, is the Mass Archives. Somebody's supposed to put it back in print. But the man who got that, John, which is loud. There's so many things in after him. He was known as the Apostle, John Eliot. Yes, thank you. The Apostle to the Indians. And Natick, you look at his old church where it's covered with rainbow flags. So I don't think he'd be too happy about the church today. But
right. Well, and just as a little side note, the Wellesley College was making a big deal about naming rights. What are they like? A declaration that this land had been owned by Native Americans, putting aside the fact that Native Americans didn't have a concept of land ownership. But because I knew a student over there, and I said, well, if you're so concerned about land ownership and honoring Native Americans, why don't you invite the Natick praying Indians to come over to Wellesley College?
Yeah.
They can take it back. It's like, no, we don't want to have them come.
That's a little different, yeah. By the way, now that we're going a little bit of a rabbit trail, several years ago, I was invited myself and our Reverend Stevie Kraft. There was at the monument in Plymouth, the beautiful Forefathers Monument.
Yes.
F My People. It was F My People rally. And at this rally, there were some Indian chiefs there. And they were thanking the pilgrims. They were thanking the ancestors of the pilgrims because they brought Christianity to this continent. And then we prayed, and all the Mayflower descendants, I happen to be one, held hands. It was a very moving moment. Of course, there was a lot of horrible over the course of years. There was lots of injustices, but not with the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims had an excellent.
And also, I think that a lot of the Native Americans are very patriotic Americans.
They are.
I happened to go to a powwow several years ago at the Ashby in on the Cape, and they were very patriotic. They had the veterans, they had the flags.
Yeah,
they were very happy to have been part of this country. It's not, not quite the way people on the left want to portray it. But I have to ask you, Hal. I mean, the obvious question, the big elephant in the room. How are you feeling about the election of President Donald J. Trump?
Well, I was up until in 2016. I was up until about 4 a.m., maybe 3 a.m. I think it was announced by 1 o'clock. And now I'm a constitutionalist, and I know you are.
Yes.
And Donald Trump isn't quite a constitutionalist.
Right. As close as we've had since probably
in my lifetime. No question about it. People would ask, well, how, you're a constitutional. I said, because Ron Paul wasn't on the ballot, or Rand Paul wasn't on the ballot, the two of them.
Right.
That's why I voted for Donald Trump. I had a sign on my front and my property in the front, along with other signs. Now, in Boston, it's very seldom that I would ever people I vote for ever get elected. In New Hampshire, I voted for 9 people, and 8 of them got elected. That would be. Now, of course, he didn't carry New Hampshire, but he won New Hampshire. I mean, he won. So
they had the Massachusetts people bust over the border like they do every 4 years.
But we, the governor won. The only one that didn't was the congressman. I voted for. It was Chris Pappas won, the Democrat. But all of the Republicans that I voted for all won. Not to say the Republican Party is the greatest thing in the world.
But yeah, it's all we have. And I mean, I was very anxious about it because of what happened in 2020. Let's not go there, because right now I have YouTube carrying a pirate YouTube station carrying our interviews. So we still can't talk about that, believe it or not, even though the Biden regime is gone. They still don't like mentioning.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Well, I know that when I'm looking, Pennsylvania was like 90%. And a lot of these, I was watching Newsmax the whole time.
Yeah.
I didn't flip. I flipped on a little bit. It was mostly, and I stood up. I couldn't even relax. They said, 90%, and they wouldn't call it. I said, oh no, they're going to shut the place down. They're going to.
That's what I was afraid of. And I almost was sick in the week or two leading up to that election, just because I'd spent 4 years covering what happened in 2020, interviewing all the major people involved in it. And I remember that Steve Turley, I don't know if you know who he is, big podcaster, and he's been on my show, and he was doing all this talk about Trump's going to win. Trump's going to look at these polls, and he's a good man. He's a good statistician.
Yeah.
Showing he's 2 ahead here, and I was upset because I'm like, I sent him a note saying, I love your happy talk. I look to it every day so I can feel better. But let's not forget what happened. They don't care. They're going to do the same crap they did in 2020. They will not let this happen. And he sent me back a note saying I'd been traumatized. Okay, fine. The point is that by the election night, I was so upset that I was almost like in a stupor. I could barely keep my eyes open. I'm there having beer and having pizza, I'm like, oh, and I'm half asleep sitting on the couch. And then all of a sudden I open my eye and I see Rachel Maddow's face.
Oh yeah.
And then I'm like, all of a sudden, yes, it's happening, because that's when I knew. And then I was totally jacked.
Well, I tell you what, the next morning I woke up and the air was nice and crisp. And it had a nicer, crisper taste to it. It smelled.
It was a beautiful moment. I felt like it was like my bar mitzvah.
What's fascinating, though, if you go to the various election results, 2024 presidential, and you look at a political map of the United States, red and blue.
Yeah.
If you just avoid that, if you look into counties and towns, there's even parts of Massachusetts where Trump did very well.
He did much better this time around.
He won Fall River, for crying out loud.
No,
Not by much, but he won.
But he took the Hispanic vote. He did win Fall River.
No, he did. By like 51%. Yeah.
And he won all the battleground states, all the bellwether counties, the popular vote, everything, the whole. And this was even with the cheating. They still, I noticed, there was still little attempts to steal things. In California, they were counting votes a month after the election.
Yeah.
So they put in a couple of.
Well, that's because they still had a lot of House seats that were being.
Oh, yeah. They tried to do that, but it didn't work. Yeah. And I think that it's because Trump learned from the last time. He also took the lesson from Glenn Youngkin in Virginia, who fielded a team of thousands of volunteers who manned the counting rooms, who manned the polling places, and also he fielded a team of hundreds of lawyers who were there on call in case anything was going on. Yeah. You drop a dime, and they were on it, and that's exactly how Trump ran at this time.
And it was also a lot of Republicans voted early.
That's the other thing. They tricked us last time with that, saying, "Oh, don't go out election day." Well, is that way they could the machines were breaking down.
Yeah.
No, people got all the tricks, all of the harvesting, all of it. I still think, however, in the aftermath, as amazing as everything is with Trump and the incredible things he's doing, I hope that he does stay the course on election reform, because the system is really broken. It's not just this last election. It's probably been broken since the 19th century.
Yeah.
We cannot get it right in terms of one man, one vote.
Well, I know that Virginia, many states got a lot of names off the rolls that have been dead, moved away. Virginia got thousands. I think it actually did it go to the Supreme Court. They had, we have to get rid of these. So there's a lot of this stuff going on in states all over the country where people, there's an old saying in Boston: vote often and early for James Michael Curley. And the guy who was a Democrat that passed away. He lived in the Chicago suburbs, and this is supposed to be a joke, but in the will, he said, "I want to be buried in Chicago so I can remain active in politics long after I'm dead."
Right.
And that does happen, but the question is it enough to overturn an election? Now, here in New Hampshire,
I think it was Bob Dole, of all people, who said that on his obituary, he said when he dies, he wants to be able to look down and see how he voted. But yeah, I mean, they had this group called ERIC, ERIC, that was hired by about 20 states to clean the election rolls. They didn't do diddly squat, even in red states. I mean, it was a fraud. And it turns out that they were financed by that billionaire from Hungary. You know who I'm talking about.
Oh yes.
And all this other stuff. So I think that the system still has to find reform. They have to have same-day voting, no more absentee ballots unless you're overseas, or
you're in the military, or
and you have to have a signature on file at your local clerk.
I remember
and ID, voter ID, and paper ballots, all of those things.
Well, New Hampshire, it's interesting. Unfortunately, Trump didn't win. He didn't lose by a whole lot, but he 3 or 4%. But we actually got 22 or 21 new Republicans at the State House. We got a supermajority in the Senate. There's 400 legislators, state reps. There's only 24 senators. We got all of the governor council, which is more powerful than most states.
Right.
The governor, she's she's not
bad.
She's more of a moderate to conservative, as opposed to she's not like the former governor of Maine. That's pretty.
What happened to Maine? Maine has completely fallen off the edge.
Well, if you look at the map of Maine, you will see mostly red. If you look at the political map.
Yeah, if you go upstate, but that Portland.
No, but even see, if you get Greater Portland, if you dug a trench around Greater Portland, all those towns and cities, and push it out to the ocean, it would be a very conservative state. I mean, it's considered. You do have the Democrats have all three right now, but they don't have a big majority in the House and the Senate. But
they control the machines. The same thing happened to Vermont.
Yeah,
you had all the New Yorkers going up there, like Bernie Sanders and Howard Dean.
Yeah,
and
what I've noticed, Aroostook County, where I get up there. I used to get up there maybe 2 or 3 times a year. I'll be heading up there in August. A lot of people are moving in from around the country, conservative types, and the property is pretty. You can buy a farm, 20 or 30 acres or more for what you might pay for a condo in Brooklyn.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Brookline,
Yeah.
So the Amish are moving up there, So, and he won. He won that. He won that.
He won the Amish put him over the top in Pennsylvania, and there was this guy. I forget his name escapes me right now, but he was Republican activist, kind of a hippie-looking guy, who worked daily for years registering Amish people, finding low propensity voters who don't generally get to the polls, and getting them to the polls. Now he's doing it in New Jersey. So, there are people like that who are Scott Pressler. You should give a shout out.
Yeah. Well, I have my family. My girls had to vote absentee, but I I all had their ballots in it because they say, who should I vote for? Well, I'm not telling you to vote for, but this is how I'm recommending. And they pretty much voted the way I suggested they vote.
Well, I mean, these are very exciting times, and Trump has a clear mandate.
I'm actually an elected official, Chuck, right now.
Oh, yeah? Oh, so
Yeah.
you were elected. I know you were running.
I ran for county commissioner in 22. I came in second in the primary.
Yeah.
I came in second, but a very distant second,
Okay.
And I really did. It's not that I wanted the seat. I was asked to run, but after I declared my candidacy, a guy who had been the former sheriff, grew up in Laconia, I thought, oh, he's the homeboy. No matter, I'm not going to win this one. But I ran for budget committee in the town of Alton. There was an opening, and I was appointed with the approval of the board of the budget committee members. And then it was only until March, so I ran unopposed. There was 798 votes cast. I got 502 votes unopposed, and you needed 5% of the voters to get in.
Right.
And so it's not, we only meet 3 months out of the year. And then, we have some influence, but not. But the bottom line is that if you don't run, then there's going to be a vacuum, and you know who comes in. There's a vacuum.
And I could speak to that too. I mean, running for office, even if you don't win, you get a couple of issues over the plate, and it can be painful if you're running in a big office and you're dealing with people that are not nice. And that's politics,
Well, I know your story well. When you were running for Congress, I know it well. Yeah.
I noticed in the last election there were positions that they're unopposed. They're probably someone that's been there for 40 years.
Yeah.
I mean, there's like the Massachusetts, the local comptroller office, or you have these like little offices where you have some hack who's been in there, never opposed. Think about running for those. I'm thinking about running for it next time. Why not?
Yeah.
You get in there, you get a little inside perch into a state house, and you will be amazed at what you can do. I mean, it's not a bad gig. I've told people, you're a teenager, you're a retired person, you're an empty nester, you're a housewife, you have a little bit of time, you can do it. You can run for these offices, and there are ways to make it happen. I mean, I actually wrote a manual on that, how to do it. So, I really urge people to do that. It's almost a civic duty, actually.
Well, it is a civic duty. In fact, when I was asked to the budget committee, I had a number of people, a state rep's wife, and a few others. I said, why don't you do it? And the first time I says, well, there was another lady that was interested. I says, well, she's better at math. Let her do it. And she did, And then there was another opening. I said, okay, I'll put my name, and you take it serious, but like I said, it's not that I seek office.
No, but it's part of it's like anything else. It's you can step in there, get a couple of issues on the plate. Boston, I noticed that Mayor Wu, who's about to the left of Stalin, I mean, talk about left wingers, she refuses to allow for elected school board, in spite of the fact that the city council passed a resolution for an elected school board.
I remember
because she doesn't want people like me to run for it,
Yeah, I remember when Boston did have an elected school committee.
Yeah.
And I believe it was Mayor Menino in his first term or early is the one that oversaw that. And they said, well, the argument was they never got along. There was too much of it. Well, so what? It was just, it gave him the power to appoint. So he's only going to appoint people of that same mindset. They're not going to appoint me if I lived in Boston.
No. They don't want someone to go in and actually take a look, first of all, at the budget and find out who's getting paid what. Secondly, they don't want someone to look at the curriculum and open it up for the public to see what's being taught.
That's right.
So anyways, Hal, let my listeners and viewers know how they can reach you, how they can find out more about Camp Constitution, about the Sam Blumenfeld Foundation.
Well, first off, we do have a week-long family camp coming up in July, and you go to our website to find out about it. It's at the Singing Hills Christian Camp, July 13th to the 18th. And we have a great lineup, as we do every year, of instructors, and it's a lot of fun, a lot of education. Field trip. We're taking a field trip to Calvin Coolidge's homestead this year.
Nice.
As an optional. We take firearms training. It's optional. We have some martial arts training. We also have a ladies' retreat coming up in less than a month, right here in Alton at the Alton Bay Christian Conference Center. And we do have events going on. We have a YouTube channel, a Facebook page, a Rumble channel, Podomatic, and a number of other things. So campconstitution.net is the best way to reach out to us. Our Facebook page goes Camp Constitution. Our YouTube channel. We got over 17,000 subscribers. We were really going after our really soon. One of our got on Tucker Carlson it aired last January of last year of 23. We got 24. We got 50 or 60,000 hits on our website. We got all kinds of interest, lots of new viewers, and we have a lot of classic video. Dan Smoot, who was one of the early patrons, we're uploading most of his programs. Well, a lot of them anyway.
Now, where can I find that? Is that on the Camp Constitution site?
Well, just go to YouTube, put in Camp Constitution. You don't have to go to the website to get
he was great. I read a few of his books.
Yeah, he was one of his talk. He was one of the first conservatives get on air on the television.
Right.
And because of him, and what people would do is local people would actually pay to put it on the local network. It wasn't nationally broadcast.
Right.
But the local group would say, "Hey, we're going to go to our channel. We're going to buy 10 minutes a time."
The cable station.
Well, the so-called fairness doctrine was passed as a result. That got them off the air.
Right. Sure.
Fairness doctrine, you had to give the other side of free time. And a lot of nations couldn't do it. But some stuff he has is timeless, and we have all of our classes that we videotape, and there's other things. Hopefully I'll be able to get a link to this and upload it on our YouTube channel as well.
Oh yeah, I'll send it over, and I put a link to Camp Constitution on my station as part of this, which is on Rumble.
Anyway, our website is campconstitution.net, and then again, I encourage you to sign up for the Samuel Blumenfeld Archive. We have an online bookstore where we sell a lot of the things that we have our own little printing arm, but a publishing arm. But we also carry books from other. And we have some nice yard signs. We have one that says "Fight Racism, Defund Planned Parenthood."
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. So Hal Shurtleff, I want to thank you for joining me as always. Great to see you. Great to talk to you. We should do it again soon.
All right, Joe. Thanks for having me. God bless.